Well, welcome everyone. Come on, gather in close around the fire here in our little storybook world. The night sky above us is just immense today, completely full of stars. But down here? Down here, the fire is warm and the shadows are dancing. And a very special welcome to you, my little disciple lamb sitting right there on your stool. I see you've got your ears wide open, which is great, because tonight, I'm passing down a story to all you. And it's not just any story, right? It's an exploration of this deeply ancient mystery that kind of completely changes how we see the universe itself. We're going to uncover the deep roots behind a single, profound title given to the Creator's voice. So make yourselves comfortable, feel the warmth of that fire as we turn the very first page of our story together.
So our story starts with an old fisherman named John. And before he ever wrote down this famous sentence, he was just a man. Actually, scratch that. He was a rough fisherman with calloused hands who spent 3 years walking these really dusty roads beside Jesus. He watched him live, he watched him die, and by his own account, he saw him alive again. And then, he just sat with all of those memories for decades. Imagine what it must have been like for an old man, near the end of his life, trying to finally put the absolute infinite into words. When John finally put his pen to parchment, he didn't start with a star or a manger or a baby. No, he reached all the way back to before the beginning of the world. And out of all the titles he could have chosen, he picked the strangest one imaginable. He called the Son of God a word. Okay, let's dive into this because I really want you to ask yourself, little lamb, why a word? Think about the pure majesty of a king wearing a heavy golden crown. A king gives you this crystal clear picture of royalty and authority, right? Or think about a lion. A lion gives you a visceral, heart-pounding picture of roaring power and undeniable strength. But why on earth call the Son of God the thing that just comes out of a mouth, a fragile little syllable that floats into the air and just vanishes? Well, it turns out John knew exactly what he was doing. That one specific title carries more weight than almost any sentence ever written in human history. And to really grasp it, we have to understand what a word truly is at its core. Think about it deeply for a moment with me. A word is the most ordinary, yet absolutely magnificent thing in the world. Really, a word is the ultimate bridge. Like, right now, there is a thought locked inside your head. It has no shape, it has no color, no sound at all. If we didn't have words, we'd be entirely isolated. We'd be trapped forever inside our own minds, completely unable to share our fears, our love, or our hopes with anyone else. But the exact moment you speak, that invisible thing crosses the air and literally lands inside someone else's mind. The hidden suddenly becomes visible, the silent becomes heard. A word takes what is hidden deep inside and brings it out into the open for everyone. Hold on to that beautiful metaphor, okay? Because it is the beating heart of our entire story tonight. Now, to truly feel the massive weight of John's choice, we've got to travel back in time. We're going to weave together 3 ancient linguistic threads that all converge perfectly in his account. Our story sweeps from the Hebrew traditions of Genesis, then it fast-forwards 1,000 years to the Aramaic synagogues, and finally, it reaches the wider Greek world of the 1st century. So let's trace that very first thread, all the way back to the beginning.
So in the ancient Hebrew tradition, the word sitting right underneath this whole concept is devar. Now, the ancient Hebrew mind, they didn't think of God's word as just some empty sound that faded into the breeze. No way. To them, speaking was an action. It was a tangible, physical force. Devar meant 2 things at the exact same time. A spoken word, yes, but also a physical event or a deed. The exact same word covers both the saying and the doing. It's wild. A word from God was an actual event that created reality. Just picture the absolute stunning nothingness before creation, and then feel that rhythmic beat of Genesis. God spoke, and it was so.
You see, the Hebrews would look up at the breathtaking sweep of the Milky Way on a clear night, kind of like the one we're sitting under right now, and they understood that those heavens weren't built by muscle or heavy lifting, not at all. They were built by the sheer force of God's spoken word, literally flinging galaxies into place. And this word, it didn't just stop at creation. It came almost as a living, breathing thing to prophets like Jeremiah. It directed the dramatic rise and the crushing fall of vast empires. God even compared his word to rain and snow that falls from the sky, hitting the dry, cracked desert earth, absolutely guaranteed to soak the ground and never, ever return empty. It was this enormous, active, unstoppable force. All right, now we follow our story past the Babylonian exile, fast-forwarding 1,000 years into the world Jesus was actually born into. And to put that into perspective, 1,000 years is like us looking all the way back to the Middle Ages. By this time, ordinary Jewish people didn't speak Hebrew as their daily tongue anymore. You could literally hear the shift in the air. The ancient Holy Hebrew was carefully kept for the sacred scrolls, but Aramaic? Aramaic was the dusty, everyday language of the bustling streets, the loud marketplaces, and the quiet kitchen tables. So when people gathered together on the Sabbath, they needed the ancient scriptures translated out loud so they could actually understand the stories of their ancestors.
And this brings us to our second linguistic thread, the Aramaic word memra. The translators of that time had this deep, trembling awe for God's holiness. I mean, the idea of the Creator was so immense, so intensely pure, that they were genuinely nervous about speaking of Him too casually. So they created this reverent buffer to talk about Him without fear. Instead of saying God Himself walked in the garden or God Himself created the world, they would say the memra, the word of the Lord did it. The word was essentially God's hand reaching down into the dirty, messy world.
Try to paint a vivid picture in your mind for a second. Imagine a young boy, maybe even John himself, sitting on a hard wooden bench in a Galilee synagogue. The dust is dancing in these golden shafts of sunlight cutting through the room, and the echoing voice of the rabbi fills the air. Week after week, this young boy hears that the memra, God's very presence, reaches down to rescue and touch creation. But the translators left a beautiful tension unresolved. They never fully explained exactly what or who this word actually was. It was like a giant puzzle with a missing piece, and that mystery just lingered in the air, generation after generation.
So for centuries, this single, massive question just hung in the air. Who is this word of the Lord? Well, John, having heard this question his entire life, finally connects the dots. He takes this holy, ancient, mysterious phrase, and he essentially points across a crowded room at an ordinary-looking tradesman from Nazareth with calloused hands. And he says, that one. The cosmic word you've heard about your whole life, it has a face now, and he just sat down to eat dinner with you. The sheer shock of that claim changed absolutely everything.
But you know, John's story wasn't just meant for the synagogue. He was writing in Greek, sending his incredible account out into a much wider world. This was a world full of intense thinkers and philosophers standing on these pristine marble balconies, meticulously mapping the constellations in the night sky. They felt this desperate, aching yearning to understand the mathematical heartbeat and the underlying logic behind the stars. Now, they had never heard of the Aramaic memra, but they were chasing something that sounded remarkably similar.
Which brings us to our third and final thread, the Greek word logos. In plain, everyday Greek, it just means word or speech. But to these philosophers, it was the name for the rational order holding the entire cosmos together. You see, they had a deep, terrifying fear of chaos. They truly believed that without the logos, the seasons would completely fail and the oceans would just rise up and swallow the earth whole. It was this vital, urgent current that stopped the universe from dissolving into absolute ruin. They could feel this order, they could study it, but to them it was just an abstract, faceless force.
And this brilliantly illustrates John's absolute genius. To the Greeks, the logos was real, sure, but it was cold and impersonal, kind of like a marble pillar. I mean, a mathematical principle cannot love you back, right? But John builds a bridge over both the Aramaic and Greek mysteries with one staggering claim. He says the logic behind the universe isn't a cold force, it has a heartbeat. The warm, loving word of the Lord actually put on skin and moved in next door to us.
And once you realize this, you start to see it literally everywhere in John's account. Jesus repeatedly does the exact same things the Word of God has always done. When a massive storm with howling winds threatens to drown his friends, he doesn't panic. He just speaks 3 words, peace, be still, and the sea goes completely flat. Why? Because the sea has been obeying that exact voice since the very day it was made. He speaks and wakes a dead girl. He speaks and calls a man out of a 4-day tomb. He speaks with the original, terrifying authority of creation itself.
Then John writes a phrase that is doing some incredibly heavy lifting. He says the Word became flesh and dwelt among us. But the Greek word he uses there is eskenosin, which literally translates to pitch a tent. And this isn't just a random choice of words. It ties directly back to the ancient wilderness tabernacle. Think back to the thick smoke, the pillar of fire, the unapproachable holiness where God's glory came down and dwelt in a literal tent in the middle of the camp. Only this time, the tent wasn't made of cloth and animal skins. That unbelievable fiery glory was now residing in a human body of flesh and bone.
So the crucial point is that John is telling us Jesus has made God known. The root of the Greek word used there is actually where we get the modern word exegesis, which basically means to draw out and fully explain a text. You know, you might exegete a complicated book to understand what it means, but Jesus exegetes a person.
He brings the infinite, totally uncontainable God down into a human vocabulary. He draws out and lays wide open the hidden heart, the love, and the will of God in a form that we can finally look at and live with. He is God fully explained.
So what does this all mean for us, sitting here around the fire today? Well, in our loud, modern, incredibly noisy world, I know that many of you, especially you young ones, often feel this silence deeply. On the days when the sky seems closed up tight and God feels completely distant, you might be tempted to think he's just a locked door. But the entire arc of this ancient story proves the exact opposite. God is fundamentally a communicator. His natural instinct is to reach out. The silence you feel, it is not who he is. He deeply, passionately desires to make the hidden known to you.
And I really want you to notice how he chose to speak. He could have come as crushing thunder or a terrifying fire on a mountain just as he had done before, but instead, the word came gentle. He came small, as a fragile baby who needed a mother to hold him. He came as a little boy learning in a synagogue. He came as an exhausted, tired man who stood and literally wept at his friend's grave. Contrast that fragility with the galaxy-flinging power we talked about earlier. He came in a way that was so unbelievably approachable we wouldn't be afraid to come near him.
Which brings us to the final page of our storybook tonight. We have traveled a really long way together, haven't we? From the absolute darkness of Genesis, through the echoing halls of the ancient synagogues, past the marble balconies of the Greek philosophers, all the way down to a simple carpenter's table. The God who built the heavens didn't just leave you with a cold, mathematical principle or an empty sky. He spoke his final, clearest word in a person you can actually know. So, my little lamb, and all of you listening out there in the dark, I'm going to leave you with this final thought to ponder in the quiet. If the Creator's ultimate voice is a person who moved in next door, what will you say back when he speaks to you?